Holy cow! Welcome back. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but in the past two videos, we built this super awesome, cool, elite command line weather application. I couldn't literally imagine a cooler application to build, and you've done it and I've done it. We're basically now ready to go work at Google and Facebook. You know what I've noticed? We made our app, we refactored it, but uh-oh, we've done something that's a big no-no. We haven't really added error handling to our app, so if things crash, users are just gonna get these awful, ugly, terrible error messages. And we can't have that. We're above that. So what are we gonna do? Well, I'll tell you what we're gonna do first. We're gonna look at our application and see where it would be appropriate to add some error handling. So now we're purposely gonna break our application. Yes, we build and then we destroy. By the way, I will note that I am no longer using this API key. I've reset it, so if you have some funny idea about stealing my key and racking up $1 million worth of charges on the weather API, tough nuggets, not gonna happen. What is gonna happen, for instance, if I expire the API key so that we can't use the API key anymore? We can't connect. So let's go ahead and run the program, weather3.dart. You can call it whatever you'd like. It's the same program from last week. Oh, unhandled exception. Exception, API returned a non-200 status code. Now you'll remember that we actually coded this in manually ourselves. So that's our error message. But you're gonna see it's gonna give us this really big, ugly stack trace, which for us as developers is fantastic. You really wanna see that. You want as much detail as possible. However, for the user, and ultimately, isn't our goal to get these applications into the hands of users, whether that be our family, friends, or a wider audience through the web or app stores? So before we try and fix this, let's go ahead and cause another error. I'm gonna purposely break the path to our API here. Let's test this again. 528. Oh look, we're getting a different error, but it's still showing up as unhandled exception. Oh, this time it's failed host lookup. These types of messages are not that bad for developers. However, imagine yourself as a user. You're not going to want to see these weird messages. In fact, you're probably going to stop using the application. So now we're going to explore a few ways we can add error handling to this application and hopefully resolve some of these issues. If you've been watching our videos for a while, you might remember in one of our Intro to Dart videos, we talked about the try-catch block. I think the very first thing we should do is probably add a try-catch block. And I was looking through our code, and this seems to be the line where there's the most potential for errors. If there's an error here, everything after is broken. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a try-catch block. I'm just going to catch E as the error message. And then I'm going to copy and paste all of this code into the try section. Why am I doing that? Well, the reason is because if this fails, I do not want this to execute. And then in the catch section, we're going to put this error message. There was an error executing your request. Error code below, or just error below. All right, now let's check and see if this error that we had before looks any better. 80528. There was an error executing your request. Error below. Failed host lookup. 11 api.weather.api.com. Okay, that's a lot better. Let's clear the terminal so you can see that again. It went from this huge line of mishmash code just to giving us the failed host lookup. So that's much nicer. Let's go ahead in our conf file and fix this. And by the way, I have expired this API key, so you're not going to be able to use this to charge me up millions of dollars on the Weather API program and then ask for some sort of bizarre ransom. Speaking of bizarre, I think I'm going to have a sip of this delicious Zevia Cola. The stevia is just enough of a neurotoxin that it stimulates my thinking. Okay, so now that we have the path correct, let's run our program again. There was an error executing your request. Error below. Exception. API returned a non-200 status code. In our call weather API section, we're calling this. If response status code equals 200, which generally means a successful connection, then we're going to return the response body. Otherwise, we're going to throw an exception. And so this is where we're getting the error we're seeing. All we're getting is no matter what the error is, API returned a non-200 status code. So as you can imagine, this is not a very useful status code. It basically tells us nothing about this program. We might as well just start changing random lines of code trying to fix this. We do not want to treat all of our error codes the same. So in order to spit back different error messages depending on which error code we get, we're going to need to look at the weatherapi.com documentation. So I have this pulled up in front of me. It's just on weatherapi.com/docs. And you'll notice there are a few HTTP status codes here. We've got 400, 401, and 403. And within each one of these HTTP status codes, you're going to notice that there's actually an individual error code. So I think the best place to start is to look at our application, and instead of only looking for status code 200, I think we should go ahead and look for 400, 401, and 403 and display different error messages depending on what's happening. The first thing that I would like to do is switch to a block or a control flow structure that you might remember from an earlier video called the switch case statement. I find that in situations such as this, where you're going to have a ton of if or if-else statements, it can be really nice just to put it in a switch case statement because it's very easy to read. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to comment out this if statement for now, just in case we need to reference it. And then we're going to create a switch block, and we're going to pass in response.status code because that is really what we're interested in. Our first case is going to be case 200. So we've got a switch case block, and we're going to do case 200. Now, if we get 200, that really means that we have a valid return from the API. So I think there we should just return our body instead of returning this entire response variable, because we don't really need the status code or any of that other information at this point. So I'm going to create a new variable called body. And what it's going to do, it's going to look and see if the response body is not empty. And if response body is not empty, we're going to await JSON to code for response body. And otherwise, we're just going to return an empty body. Now you might be wondering, what is this weird syntax I have here? Well, it's called a ternary operator. Is if this is true, the sequence that comes after the question mark is going to execute. And if it's false, the sequence that comes after the colon is going to execute. So now we have a body, but you'll notice something, the JSON decode here is not working. We actually need to add our convert library to this package now too. Now, a quick way to do it is if you're using VS Code, you can do this quick fix option instead of typing it manually, and you can do import library Dart convert. Now you'll notice we're actually getting proper code. So let's go here and let's return body if case is 200. Oh, we can remove our break statement because return negates the need for that. So then let's make our default. And let's have our default message still throw an exception. And this exception is going to say something similar to what we had before. Non-200 status code returned. But you know what I'd like to do this time? Let's go ahead and also return the response.status code so that we can see what the error is like. All right, so let's go ahead and test this with our application that we know is broken. Enter the zip code. There was an error executing your request. Error code below. Exception, non-200 status code return. We're getting error 403 here. Let's go to our docs. 403 is things related to API keys. So as I told you, this API key has been disabled. So that's the error that we're getting here. What's going to happen if we break our root API path? Let's check here. Weather3.dart, we're going to run 80528. Oh, look at this. We're returning error code 404. For those of you who have programmed before, you're going to know that error 404 means not found. 404 isn't on here. So I think we're going to want to also add a case statement for error 404. Let's say case 400. We're going to throw an exception that says, what should we make it say? Yo man, this location was not found. And let's also return response.status code. Let's test this again. I just noticed I put error code 400 instead of 404. Now that we've changed case to 404, let's go ahead and test this application. Oh great, yo man, this location was not found, 404. I think I'd like to put error 404. I'd also like to put error here. I think in addition to only returning the status code, we should also return the body, because my gut tells me that body probably also has some information that we could use. Now notice we're able to just use the body variable since we're not accessing any getters or setters or classes of this object. So let's go ahead and change our path to be correct again and see what happens with this broken API key. Let's see if we get a more useful error. I bet we can now. Oh wow, look at that. So we get non-200 status code returned, error 403. Error code 2008 message API key has been disabled. That is actually way more useful. But I feel like we don't need this block here. So let's go ahead and just update our code just a little bit. And instead of returning the whole body, let's go back and do some string interpolation here. And let's return body code. And then let's return code here. And then let's put message And then let's also put body message. Let's copy and paste this to the same line as above. I feel like this is a really useful error message. Now let's try this again. Run weather3.dart 80528, error code 403, code null, message null. Oh, I see what we've done here. We have to put error in front of all these. So I'm going to do that real quick. Testing again. There we go. Code 2008 message API key has been disabled. So that's great. We have a much more useful error message here. Now let's go ahead and look at the other cases that we need to include. 400, 401, 403. So why don't we just go ahead and add case statements for all these? Case 400, case 401, case 403. Let's copy and paste our exception here for all the same error codes. Now you might wonder, why can't we just have a generic get all that prints out this message? When you have all these different error codes, you might want to display a different error code to the user. So for instance, if we look at error code 401, we can notice that it tends to be things either being invalid API request URL or parameter Q not found. So for this, we might just want to say general API error detected. It's a nice little message. So what can we do for error code 401? API key provided is invalid. We could just say no valid API key found. What about 403? What do we have here for 403? It looks like the API key is disabled. So let's just say API key no longer valid. And for error 404, we can keep our statement, yo man, this location was not found. I think these errors look pretty great. What if we leave the API key blank? What error do we get here? Wonderful. We get our exception that says no valid API key found. And we get the error codes, and then we get the more specific message here. So this is actually really useful. Now, those of you who are very astute probably noticed something. Now that we are just returning the body here on a case 200, that means we actually have to go back and modify our main Dart function. Because look here, we're doing var weather data equals JSON decode, and then we're calling the weather API and calling the zip code. So now let's test this with a valid API key. Oh no, there is an error executing your request. Error below. Type map string dynamic is not a subtype of type string? Oof, that's a really bad error. Luckily, we know that we need to disable JSON decode because it's already been decoded. Let's clear our terminal and run this one more time. Aha! Success! We actually have our full weather forecast here as we specified before. Notice the snow seems to have disappeared from my weather forecast, so I am happy. I know that was an annoying sound, but you're gonna have to deal with it. So now let's test another error code. There was an error code about a missing Q parameter. Let's go ahead and delete this Q parameter. Let's test our application again and see what happens. Wonderful. Error 400, code 1003, parameter Q is missing. Now I'm noticing something here. This might not be an issue for you, but I'm a stickler for formatting. So I think after error detected, I'd like to put in some line breaks so that we can read this on multiple lines. Let's go ahead and add that to all of our different errors here. Let's test this again and see if that looks any better. Ooh, I like that, except for we do have a space here that we don't need. Let's go ahead and delete these spaces here. Here we go. Test again. Looks great. That's actually way easier for me to read. I've been harping on you guys about this a lot in the last videos, and I just want to go ahead and address this. We are copy and pasting this same message right here an awful lot of times. And as I am always preaching, we want to reuse our code and messages whenever possible. We are going to create a new function called generate error message. Let's take a look at how it's done. So down here at the bottom of our utilities file, I'm going to make a function called generate error message. And you'll notice I'm going to pass in the response status code, and then I'm going to pass in a message of string dynamic type, map string dynamic, called error code. And then I've said response code is response status code. Error code is, as you'll notice, the same thing, error and then code. And then we have our error code message. And I've actually formatted this a little better to be 3 lines. So we're going to go back up here, and instead of this, we are merely going to put in generate error message. So we're going to pass in response.status code, and then we're going to pass in the body. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this code, and I'm going to use it for all of the others. All right, now let's test our application where we know the Q variable is missing. Great, that's actually some really nice formatting. So in this video, what we've done is in our main weather file, we added a high-level try catch block that returns an error message to catch any errors that might happen with weather data, and specifically with the call weather API or the get zip code function. And then we're gonna print our weather back like normal. Now, more importantly, in our utilities file that we've been using, we replaced our if statement inside of call weather API to not just look for case 200 and then do else. We're looking for 200, which is valid, and then we're gonna return our body. And then we're looking at a variety of other error codes here. And then we've also got a default that pops up just in case. This might not seem that exciting, but when we have bigger applications, specifically with UIs that we want to have reflect these errors, it's gonna be very, very valuable. It's extremely important for users to not be seeing weird, garbled, strange error messages or stack traces. So this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to error handling in Dart. I hope you understand the very basics. Our weather application is nearly complete. What's even better than having proper error handling? Well, I'm going to tell you, building tests into your code so that before you even deploy the code, you can catch most of the errors. In our next lesson, and the final lesson on this weather app, command line weather app to be specific series, we're going to look at using a technique called unit testing in Dart. Now, because Dart rocks and is awesome, it's actually surprisingly easy, but you are going to be amazed by how powerful this is. Imagine this. You make a change to your code. You type this in the command line, Dart test, and you get back a message after running your tests that tells you if your tests passed or not. So you can have a very easy early indication of whether you've broken anything. We will see you in that next video. You'll probably see it somewhere on screen right now. Until then, enjoy. We hope you've had a great time. Take care. I love you all as if you were my children.